The December wind howled through the pine trees like a wounded animal, sending sheets of snow sideways across the frozen main street of Cedar Ridge. Sheriff Luke Harding pulled his wool coat tighter around his broad shoulders as he guided his horse through the deserted town. The kerosene street lamps flickered weakly against the storm, casting dancing shadows on the wooden storefronts. It was past midnight, and most folks had the good sense to be tucked warm in their beds. But Luke had learned long ago that trouble didn't keep regular hours, especially in a frontier town where the law was only as strong as the man wearing the badge. His breath formed white clouds in the frigid air as he made his usual rounds, checking the bank, the general store, and the saloon, all locked tight against the storm. The snow crunched beneath his horse's hooves, the only sound besides the relentless wind. Luke had been sheriff of Cedar Ridge for 5 years now, ever since he'd come west after the war. At 32, he'd seen enough violence to last a lifetime, which was why he preferred the quiet nights like this, even with the bitter cold biting at his face. As he turned his horse toward the old warehouse district on the edge of town, something caught his eye. A faint, flickering light emanated from the abandoned stable behind Morrison's old grain depot. The building had been empty for near 2 years, ever since Morrison died and his widow moved back east. No one should be there, especially not on a night like this. Luke dismounted quietly, tying his horse to a frost-covered post. His hand instinctively moved to the Colt .45 at his hip as he approached the stable. The wind masked his footsteps, but he moved carefully anyway, years of experience guiding him through the shadows. As he drew closer, he could make out the weak glow of what looked like a small oil lamp through the gaps in the weathered boards. He paused at the door, listening. Above the wind, he heard something that made his blood run cold, the soft crying of a child. Without hesitation, he pushed open the creaking door. The sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Huddled in the corner of a broken stall, barely visible in the dim lamplight, was a woman. She was painfully thin, her dark hair hanging in tangled strands around a face marked by exhaustion and fear. What clothing she wore was woefully inadequate for the weather, a thin cotton dress torn at the hem, and a shawl that looked more like a rag than proper covering. But it was what she held that truly caught Luke's attention. 3 small children pressed against her, all of them shivering violently beneath a single threadbare blanket. The woman's eyes met his, and Luke saw raw terror flash across her features. She pulled the children closer, if that was even possible, her arms tightening around them protectively. The oldest child, a boy who couldn't be more than 7, peered at Luke with eyes too old for his age. The 2 younger ones, girls by the look of their long hair, buried their faces in their mother's sides. "Please," the woman whispered, her voice hoarse and barely audible. "We'll leave. We'll go right now. Just give us a moment." Luke raised his hands slowly, showing his palms in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "Ma'am, I'm not here to run you off. I'm Sheriff Harding." He kept his voice low and steady, the way he'd talk to a spooked horse. "You can't stay out here. You'll freeze to death." We've managed," she said, though her chattering teeth betrayed the lie. One of the little girls whimpered, and the woman stroked her hair with a trembling hand. Luke's eyes swept the stable. No food that he could see, no proper bedding, just some old straw and that pitiful blanket. The lamp was nearly out of oil, its flame sputtering weakly. These people wouldn't last the night. "What's your name, ma'am?" he asked gently. She hesitated, her grip on the children tightening. "Mary," she finally said. "Mary Whitfield." "Well, Mrs. Whitfield, I've got a warm house not far from here. Good stove, plenty of blankets. You and your young ones need to get out of this cold." "We can't," Mary said quickly, panic edging into her voice. "We can't trouble anyone. We just need to rest a bit, then we'll move on." Luke studied her face in the dim light. He'd seen that look before, the haunted expression of someone running from something or someone. But right now, that didn't matter. What mattered was getting these children somewhere warm before they caught their death. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that's not a request," he said, putting a touch of authority in his voice. "As sheriff, I can't leave you and these children out here to freeze. Now, you can come willingly, or I can carry each one of you to my house myself. But either way, you're not spending another minute in this stable." The boy looked up at his mother. "Mama," he whispered, "I'm so cold." Those 3 words seemed to break something in Mary. Her shoulders sagged, and she nodded slowly. "All right," she whispered, "but just for tonight. We'll leave at first light." Luke nodded, not arguing. He'd deal with tomorrow when it came. Right now, he needed to get them to safety. He shed his heavy coat and wrapped it around Mary's shoulders, ignoring her weak protests. Then he scooped up the smallest girl, who couldn't have been more than 3. She weighed almost nothing, like holding a bird. "Can you walk?" he asked Mary. She nodded, struggling to her feet while holding the other girl. The boy stood on his own, though Luke could see him swaying slightly. Without a word, Luke shifted the little one to one arm and put his other hand on the boy's shoulder, steadying him. The walk to Luke's house was only a few minutes, but it felt like hours battling against the wind and snow. Mary stumbled twice, and each time Luke steadied her, noticing how she flinched at his touch. Whatever had happened to this woman, it had left deep scars. Luke's house was modest but sturdy, built of good timber with a stone chimney that drew properly. It sat just behind the sheriff's office, close enough that he could respond quickly to trouble but far enough to offer some privacy. He guided them inside, setting the little girl down gently before immediately moving to stoke the banked fire in the stove. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chairs near the stove. "Get warm." Mary sank into a chair, her children clustering around her. In the better light of his kitchen, Luke could see just how bad their condition was. The children's faces were gaunt, their eyes hollow with hunger. Mary's hands were chapped and raw, her fingernails broken. All of them had the gray pallor of people who'd been cold for far too long. Luke filled a pot with water and set it on the stove to heat, then rummaged through his cupboards. He had beans and salt pork from yesterday, some biscuits, and a bit of milk he'd bought fresh that morning. It wasn't fancy, but it would fill empty bellies. As he worked, he noticed Mary watching his every move, her body tense as if ready to flee at any moment. The children, however, were focused entirely on the warmth of the stove, holding their small hands out toward it with expressions of pure relief. "What are their names?" Luke asked, keeping his tone conversational as he sliced the salt pork. Mary hesitated again, then seemed to decide there was no harm in it. "This is James," she said, touching the boy's head. "And Sarah and little Emma." "Fine names," Luke said. "I've got some clothes that might fit James, belonged to my nephew when he visited last summer. And I think Mrs. Patterson left some things here when she did my mending that might work for the girls." "We couldn't," Mary started. "You could and you will," Luke said firmly but kindly. "No child is going to shiver in my house when I've got perfectly good clothes sitting in a trunk." He found the clothes and handed them to Mary, then stepped outside to give them privacy to change. The wind hit him like a physical blow, and he marveled that they'd survived even a few hours in that stable. When he came back in, the children were dressed in the warm, dry clothes, looking almost like different people already. The food was simple but hot, and Luke watched with a tight throat as the children fell on it like starving wolves, which, he supposed, they were. Mary ate more slowly, mechanically, as if she'd forgotten what food was for beyond basic survival. "When's the last time you ate a proper meal?" he asked quietly. Mary's hand stilled on her spoon. 3 days, she admitted. We lost our supplies. Lost, Luke thought, or had them taken. But he didn't press. Instead, he simply ladled more beans onto her plate. After they'd eaten, he showed them to the small spare room. It had only one bed, but it was clean and warm, with plenty of blankets. The children were asleep almost as soon as they lay down, exhausted beyond measure. Mary sat on the edge of the bed, watching them with a mixture of love and despair. "I'll be just in the front room if you need anything," Luke said from the doorway. "Door locks from the inside if that makes you feel safer." Mary looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you doing this?" Luke considered the question. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I took an oath to protect the people of this town. That includes folks passing through who need help." "We're not," Mary started, then stopped. "Thank you," she whispered instead. Luke nodded and turned to go, but her voice stopped him. "Sheriff Harding, you should know. We might bring trouble." He turned back, meeting her worried gaze. "Ma'am, I've been dealing with trouble since before I pinned on this star. Whatever it is, we'll handle it, right now. You just focus on getting some rest." As he settled into his chair by the fire, Luke couldn't shake the image of Mary's fearful eyes and the way she'd held those children like they were all that anchored her to this world. Whatever had driven them out into a blizzard with nothing but the clothes on their backs, it had to be bad. And his instincts, honed by years of reading people, told him it wasn't over. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight. There were 3 children sleeping warm and safe in his spare room. And that was enough. Luke added another log to the fire and settled in for a long night's watch, his hand never far from his gun. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside his small house, he'd created an island of safety in a dangerous world. For now, that would have to be enough. The morning light filtered weakly through the frost-covered windows, casting pale shadows across Luke's modest kitchen. He dozed fitfully in his chair through the night, waking at every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the walls. The storm had finally exhausted itself near dawn, leaving behind a world buried in white silence. Luke stirred the embers in the stove and added fresh wood, coaxing the fire back to life. He filled the coffee pot with water and set it to boil, moving quietly so as not to wake his guests. But as he turned from the stove, he found Mary standing in the doorway, still wearing his coat over the borrowed dress Mrs. Patterson had left behind. "Morning," he said softly. "The coffee'll be ready soon." She nodded, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. In the morning light, he could see her more clearly. The sharp angles of her cheekbones, the dark circles under her eyes, the way she held herself like she expected a blow at any moment. He'd guess her age at maybe 27, though hardship had a way of aging folks beyond their years. "The children still sleeping?" he asked, busying himself with cups and saucers to put her at ease. "Yes," her voice was barely above a whisper. They haven't slept so sound in weeks." Luke poured 2 cups of coffee when it was ready, setting one on the table and gesturing for her to sit. She did, wrapping her hands around the cup like it was precious treasure. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the distant call of a winter bird. "I should start breakfast," Luke said eventually. "Got eggs from the widow Martinez and I can fry up some bacon." "Let me help," Mary said quickly. "Please, I need to do something." He understood that need, the desire to not be beholden, to earn your keep. He nodded and showed her where things were kept. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, Mary proving herself capable despite her weakened state. She moved around his kitchen with practiced efficiency, and he found himself wondering what her life had been like before whatever tragedy had set her on the run. The smell of bacon soon filled the small house, and it wasn't long before 3 small faces peered around the corner. The children looked better after a night's rest, though they still had that wary look of young creatures who'd learned not to trust too easily. "Morning, young ones," Luke said with a smile. "Who's hungry?" The youngest, Emma, hid behind her sister Sarah, but James stepped forward. "We are, sir. Thank you, sir." The boy's formal manners spoke of good raising, and Luke felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. These weren't folks who'd always lived rough. Something had happened to change their circumstances, and recently, too. They ate breakfast together, the children gradually relaxing as their bellies filled. Emma even smiled when Luke made a face at her over his coffee cup. But Mary remained tense, her eyes constantly darting to the windows, as if expecting to see danger lurking in the snow-covered street. After breakfast, Luke stood and reached for his coat and hat. "I need to check in at the office. Make sure Deputy Morrison didn't burn the place down overnight. You folks just make yourselves at home. There's more wood by the stove if it gets cold." Mary stood abruptly. "We should go. You've done enough." "Sheriff Harding." "More than enough." "Where?" Luke asked simply. "Where would you go, Mrs. Whitfield? The stage won't run for days after a storm like this, and walking anywhere with 3 young ones in this snow would be foolish." Her shoulders sagged. I don't know. I just don't want to bring you trouble. Like I said last night, I can handle trouble." He paused at the door. "Besides, the children need time to recover their strength. A few days of proper food and warmth won't hurt anything." He left before she could protest further. But he could feel her worried gaze following him as he walked to the sheriff's office. The town was just beginning to stir, folks digging out from the storm. He exchanged greetings with several people, all the while thinking about the frightened woman and children in his house. Deputy Tom Morrison was indeed at the office, feet propped on the desk, reading a week-old newspaper. He jumped up when Luke entered, nearly knocking over the ink pot. "Morning, Sheriff. Quiet night except for the storm. Thought I'd lose the roof there for a while." "Any word from the telegraph office?" "The lines are down from the storm. Won't be fixed for a day or 2, Sam reckons." Luke nodded, hanging up his coat. That was both good and bad. No news could come in, but none could go out either. If someone was looking for Mary and her children, they'd have to do it the old-fashioned way. He spent the morning dealing with the usual post-storm problems. A dispute over snow-blocking access to the livery, old Mr. Henderson complaining about ice damage to his store's awning, and helping dig out the schoolhouse. All routine. But his mind kept wandering back to his house. When he returned at noon, he found a transformation. His small house was cleaner than it had been in months. The floors were swept, the dishes washed and put away, and something that smelled wonderful was simmering on the stove. Mary was mending one of his shirts while the children played quietly near the fire with some wooden blocks he'd forgotten he had. "You didn't need to do all this," he said, though he couldn't deny the house felt more like a home than it had in years. "I needed to do something," Mary replied, not looking up from her sewing. "We can't just take your charity without giving something back." "It's not charity," Luke said firmly. "It's just what neighbors do for each other." She did look up then, and there was something almost like humor in her tired eyes. "We're not neighbors, Sheriff. We're strangers you found freezing in a stable." Well, you're neighbors now, he said and meant it. The afternoon passed peacefully. Luke split wood while James watched, the boy eager to help despite his small size. The girls drew pictures with some charcoal and paper Luke found, their artwork depicting houses and flowers and smiling stick figures, normal things that seemed at odds with their current situation. As evening approached and they sat down to supper, a stew Mary had made from the supplies in his pantry, Luke noticed her tension returning. She kept glancing at the windows, starting at every sound from outside. The children picked up on her mood, becoming quieter and staying closer to her side. After the children were put to bed, Luke and Mary sat by the fire. He could see she wanted to tell him something, the words struggling to get out past whatever fear held them back. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said gently. "I've been a lawman for a good while now. I know when someone's running from something, and I know the look of someone who's afraid that something's going to catch up." Mary's hands clenched in her lap. "If I tell you, you might make us leave, or I might be better able to help protect you and the children." She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was so low he had to lean forward to hear. "My husband died 6 months ago. Fever took him. He was a good man, but he made some poor choices near the end. Borrowed money from the wrong people to try to save our farm." She paused, swallowing hard. "When he died, they came to collect, said the debt passed to me. When I couldn't pay," she trailed off. But Luke could fill in the blanks. He'd seen it before, desperate people making deals with those who preyed on desperation. "They wanted more than money," he said. It wasn't a question. Mary nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "They said I could work off the debt, the kind of work that no decent woman would do. When I refused, they said they'd take the children instead, sell them to pay what was owed." Luke felt a cold fury settle in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "So you ran? What else could I do? I took what little we had and ran. But they followed. They always find us. The last town, they almost caught us. That's when we lost everything. Our wagon, our supplies, everything except what we wore." She looked at him with haunted eyes. "They won't stop, Sheriff. They'll come here too. That's why we need to leave before—" "No." The word came out harder than he intended, and he softened his tone. "No. Mrs. Whitfield, you're not running anymore. This is where it stops. You don't understand. These aren't just common criminals. They have connections, influence. The law doesn't touch them. Maybe the law in other places doesn't," Luke said. "But this is my town, and here, the law is what I say it is. You and those children are under my protection now." Mary stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. "Why would you risk yourself for strangers?" Luke thought about how to answer that, how to explain the code he lived by, the promises he'd made to himself after seeing too much suffering in the war. How to tell her that the moment he'd seen her holding those children in that freezing stable, there was no other choice he could make. "Because it's right," he said simply. "And because I've got a feeling that you and those young ones have had enough hardship. Time for that to change." Mary opened her mouth, closed it, then surprised him by reaching out and briefly touching his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't understand it, but thank you." They sat in comfortable silence after that, watching the fire burn low. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. But inside, in the warm circle of light from the dying fire, Luke felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the sense that his house had become a home, even if just temporarily. As Mary rose to retire, she paused at the doorway. "Sheriff Harding, I want you to know, when they come, and they will come, I won't let you face them alone. I'm not brave, but for my children, for this kindness you've shown, I'll fight." Luke nodded, understanding the courage it took for her to say that. "Get some rest, Mrs. Whitfield. Tomorrow's troubles will keep till tomorrow." But as he settled into his chair for another night of watching, Luke knew trouble rarely waited for convenient times. Somewhere out there in the cold darkness, evil men were hunting a woman and 3 children. They'd come eventually, drawn by greed and cruelty. When they did, they'd find Luke Harding waiting. 3 days had passed since the storm, and an uneasy rhythm had settled over Luke's household. The children had begun to smile more freely, and Mary had lost some of the haunted look in her eyes. Luke had grown accustomed to coming home to a warm house filled with the sounds of life, children's laughter, the clatter of dishes, Mary humming softly while she worked. It was just past 10 o'clock on a moonless night when the knock came. Luke had been cleaning his rifle while Mary mended clothes by lamplight. The children were long asleep. At the sound, 3 deliberate raps that somehow managed to sound menacing. Mary's face went white as fresh snow. The shirt she'd been mending fell from her trembling hands. Luke rose slowly, setting the rifle aside but keeping his Colt within easy reach. He moved to the door with measured steps, motioning for Mary to stay where she was. Through the window, he could make out a lone figure on his porch, hat pulled low, shoulders hunched against the cold. Luke opened the door just wide enough to block any view inside. "Evening. Something I can help you with?" The man lifted his head, revealing a narrow face with pale eyes that seemed to glitter in the darkness. He was dressed in a long black coat, well-made but travel-worn, a gambler or businessman, Luke guessed, though something about him suggested neither occupation fully explained his presence. "Evening, Sheriff," the man said, his voice smooth as oil on water. "Name's Calvin Rourke. I'm looking for someone, and I heard you might be the man to ask." "That's so." Luke kept his tone neutral. "Lot of folks pass through Cedar Ridge. Who might you be looking for?" Rourke smiled, but it didn't reach those cold eyes. "A woman, pretty little thing, dark hair, traveling with 3 young ones. Poor soul's not quite right in the head. You understand. Ran off from her family after her husband passed. We're all terribly worried." Luke felt his jaw tighten at the casual lie. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description. Storms had the roads closed. Nobody's been moving through." "Funny thing," Rourke said, pulling out a thin cigar and lighting it with deliberate slowness. "Fellow at the livery seemed to think he saw you helping some folks the night of the storm. Said you were real charitable, taking them in." "Pete Morrison talks too much when he's been drinking," Luke replied. "I helped the widow Hutchins get her chickens back in their coop." "That what he saw?" Rourke took a long draw on his cigar, the tip glowing red in the darkness. "Maybe so. Maybe so. Still, I'd be obliged if you'd keep an eye out. The woman, she's not well, like I said. And those children need proper care. Their grandmother's beside herself with worry." "I'll keep it in mind," Luke said. "Now, if you'll excuse me, it's late." "Of course." Rourke tipped his hat but didn't move. "One more thing, Sheriff. The family's offering a reward for information. Substantial reward. $500. Man could do a lot with money like that." "I suppose he could," Luke said evenly. "But I've got all I need. Good night, Mr. Rourke." "Good night, Sheriff. I'll be staying at the hotel for a few days, room 3 if you remember anything." Luke watched him walk away, noting how the man moved, smooth, balanced like a cat or a gunfighter. When Rourke finally disappeared into the darkness, Luke closed and bolted the door. Mary was standing in the middle of the room, arms wrapped around herself, shaking like a leaf in a storm. "That was him," she whispered. "Not the leader, but one of them. Calvin Rourke. He's the one who—" She stopped, unable to continue. Luke moved to the window, peering out through a gap in the curtains. The street appeared empty, but he knew better than to trust appearances. "Pack some things," he said quietly, "just in case we need to move quickly." "I should go," Mary said desperately. "Now, tonight, and before they—" "You're not going anywhere," Luke interrupted. "Running now would just confirm their suspicions. Besides, you wouldn't make it a mile in the dark with 3 children. He's testing, seeing if I'll react. But if they know, they don't know, they suspect there's a difference." He turned from the window to face her. "Mrs. Whitfield, Mary, I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "What do we do?" "For now, we wait. Tomorrow, you and the children stay inside. Don't go near the windows. I'll handle my regular duties. Keep everything normal. If Rourke's watching, he'll see just another day in Cedar Ridge." Mary retired to check on the children, and Luke resumed his position by the window. His mind worked through possibilities and contingencies. Rourke hadn't come alone. Men like that never did. There would be others, probably watching the roads out of town, maybe keeping an eye on his house right now. The night passed slowly. Luke dozed in his chair, waking at every sound. Near dawn, he saw movement in the alley across the street, just a shadow, there and gone, but enough to confirm his suspicions. They were being watched. When morning came, Luke made a show of his normal routine. He walked to the office, greeted folks on the street, dealt with the usual minor complaints and problems. But he also did other things: quiet conversations with men he trusted, subtle preparations that wouldn't be noticed by watching eyes. Tom Morrison noticed his distraction. "Something on your mind, Sheriff?" "Maybe," Luke said. "Tom, you remember that trouble we had with those claim jumpers last spring?" "Sure do. Why?" "They might have similar trouble brewing. Keep your eyes open and make sure your rifle's clean." Tom's eyes sharpened. He was young but not stupid. "Anything specific I should watch for?" "Strangers asking questions, men who seem too interested in my comings and goings." Luke paused. "And Tom? Might be best if you bunked here at the office for a few nights." That afternoon, Luke stopped by the general store. Sam Henderson was arranging goods on the shelves, his weathered face creasing into a smile when Luke entered. "Sheriff, what can I do for you?" "Need some supplies. Sam." Luke kept his voice casual, aware that a man was loitering outside, pretending to read a posted notice. "Ammunition, mainly, and some other things." He handed Sam a list. The old storekeeper's eyebrows rose slightly, but he just nodded. "Give me a few minutes to gather everything." While Sam worked, Luke engaged in idle conversation with Mrs. Potter, who was buying fabric. But his attention was on the street, counting the strangers, noting positions. 3 that he could see, probably more he couldn't. That evening, Luke returned home to find Mary teaching Sarah her letters while James helped Emma stack wooden blocks. It was such a peaceful, domestic scene that for a moment he could almost forget the danger lurking outside. "Any trouble?" Mary asked quietly when the children were occupied. "They're watching," Luke admitted, "but they're being careful. Rourke's probably trying to figure out if you're really here or if I'm just a stubborn lawman who doesn't like being pushed." After supper, as Mary was putting the children to bed, another knock came at the door. This time, Luke was ready. He answered with his hand on his gun. Rourke stood there again, but this time he wasn't alone. 2 men flanked him, rough-looking sorts with hard eyes and well-worn gun belts. "Evening again," Sheriff, Rourke said pleasantly. Hope you don't mind, but I brought some associates. We're all very concerned about finding this poor woman and her children. Still haven't seen anyone like that, Luke said. Maybe you should try the next town over. Millbrook's a day's ride south. Funny thing, Rourke said, his smile turning predatory. We just came from Millbrook. Trail led here. Almost like someone saw a woman and 3 children coming this way just before the storm. Trails can be misleading in snow, Luke observed. Easy to get turned around. One of Rourke's men, a thick-set fellow with a scar across his jaw, stepped forward. Look here, Sheriff, we know she's somewhere in this town. We'll find her eventually. Save everybody trouble if you just tell us where. And I'm telling you, I don't know what you're talking about, Luke said coldly. Now, I'll ask you gentlemen to move along. It's past decent folks' bedtime. Rourke studied him for a long moment. You know, Sheriff, you seem like a smart man. Smart men know when they're outnumbered. Smart men know when to step aside and let family business be handled by family. And smart men also know when they're being fed a line of horse manure. Luke replied, Whatever business you have, it's not family business. And whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. The scarred man's hand drifted toward his gun. Maybe you need more convincing. Jed, Rourke's voice was sharp. The man froze. Not here. Not yet. He turned back to Luke. We'll be around. Sheriff, this town's not that big. If she's here, we'll find her. And when we do, I hope you'll remember that you had a chance to do this the easy way. I'll keep that in mind, Luke said. Now get off my porch. They left, but their message was clear. The time for pretense was nearly over. Soon, very soon, this would come to a head. Luke closed the door and found Mary standing in the hallway, her face pale but determined. How long do we have? She asked. A day or 2, maybe less, Luke answered honestly. They'll search the town first, ask questions, maybe try to bribe some folks. When that doesn't work, they'll come for us. They'll try. Luke met her gaze steadily. Mary, I need to ask you something, and these men, how far will they go? What are we really facing? Mary was quiet for a moment. Then, Calvin Rourke is a killer, Sheriff. He dresses nice and talks smooth, but I've seen what he does to people who cross him. The others are just as bad. They'll do whatever it takes to get what they want. Luke nodded. It was what he'd expected, but hearing it confirmed helped. Then we'd better be ready for them. That night, Luke didn't even pretend to sleep. He sat by the window with his rifle across his knees, watching the shadows, planning for what was to come. The house was quiet except for the tick of the clock and the settling of the fire. Somewhere out there, Rourke and his men were planning too. But Luke had advantages they didn't know about: friends in town, knowledge of the terrain, and most importantly, something worth fighting for, sleeping peacefully in the next room. The waiting was almost over. Soon, one way or another, this would end. The morning sun cast long shadows across Luke's kitchen as Mary set breakfast on the table with trembling hands. The children ate quietly, sensing the tension that had settled over the household like a heavy blanket. Even little Emma, usually cheerful, pushed her eggs around her plate without her typical chatter. Luke sipped his coffee, watching Mary move about the kitchen. She'd barely slept. He could tell. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she startled at every small sound from outside. He wanted to reassure her, but false comfort would serve no one. Mary, he said gently, once the children had been sent to play in the other room. I think it's time you told me the rest. She sank into the chair across from him, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she didn't drink. What do you want to know? Everything. If I'm going to protect you and the children, I need to understand what we're really facing. Mary stared into her coffee for a long moment before speaking. My husband, Daniel, was a good man, a farmer, like his father before him. We had a small place outside Millbrook, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Her voice grew soft with memory. The drought 3 years ago nearly ruined us. Then the locusts came the next summer. By last year, we were desperate. Luke nodded. He'd seen it too many times. Good people driven to bad choices by circumstances beyond their control. There was a man in town, Mary continued. Marcus Thornton. He ran the saloon, among other things. Folks said he had money to lend when the bank wouldn't. Daniel didn't want to go to him, but when James took sick and we needed medicine. She trailed off, lost in the painful memory. Thornton lent you the money, Luke prompted gently. $500. The terms seemed reasonable at first. We had a year to pay it back with interest. But then Daniel found out what kind of business Thornton really ran. The saloon was just a front. He dealt in human misery. Sheriff, women who had no other choice, children sold to work in factories back east or worse. Luke's jaw tightened. He'd encountered such men before, parasites who fed on desperation and suffering. Daniel wanted to pay the money back immediately, even if it meant selling everything. But by then, Thornton had decided he wanted something else. Mary's voice dropped to barely a whisper. He wanted me. Said I could work off the debt in his establishment. Daniel refused, of course. They fought. Daniel was going to the federal marshals, going to expose everything. But he never made it, Luke guessed. Mary shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. They said it was fever, but I know better. Daniel was strong as an ox one day, dead the next. And then Thornton came calling, said the debt was mine now. Said if I didn't cooperate, he'd take the children instead, sell them to recoup his losses. So you ran. What else could I do? The words came out fierce, desperate. I sold what little we had left, took the children and ran. But Thornton has connections everywhere. Every town we stopped in, they found us. Each time we had less, ran with less. Until... She gestured helplessly at herself. Until you found us in that stable. Luke leaned back in his chair, processing this information. Marcus Thornton. He'd heard the name in law enforcement circles. The man operated just outside the reach of most local law, protected by bribes and threats. But Luke had dealt with worse. Why didn't you go to the law? He asked, though he suspected the answer. I tried. In Millbrook, the sheriff said it was a civil matter. In Carson City, the marshal said he needed proof. In Silver Creek. She shuddered. The deputy there tried to collect the bounty Thornton put on us. We barely escaped. And Rourke? Thornton's right hand, his enforcer. They say he used to be a soldier, but something went wrong in his head during the war. Now he hunts people for Thornton. Never fails to bring them back. Luke stood and moved to the window, checking the street. Sure enough, one of Rourke's men lounged against a post across the way, pretending to whittle but watching the house. Mary, listen to me, Luke said, turning back to her. What Thornton did, the lending, the threats, trying to force you into that life, it's not just wrong, it's illegal, federal illegal, the kind that brings U.S. Marshals if properly reported. But Daniel tried. Daniel didn't have what we have now, a witness willing to testify, and a lawman willing to back her up. He moved back to the table, sitting down and taking her hands in his. They were cold, trembling slightly. I know you're scared. You have every right to be, but running isn't the answer anymore. It's time to make a stand. Mary looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. They'll kill you. They'll kill all of us. Maybe they'll try. But I've got some advantages they don't know about. He squeezed her hands gently. Trust me. Mary, please. Before she could respond, young James appeared in the doorway. Mama, there's a man outside. He's just standing there watching the house. Luke rose smoothly. It's all right, son. He's just making sure we know he's there. Trying to scare us. He ruffled the boy's hair. How would you like to help me with something? James straightened, trying to look older than his 7 years. Yes, sir. I need you to keep your sisters calm and quiet today. Can you do that? Maybe tell them some stories, play some quiet games. I can do that, James said solemnly. A good man. Luke watched the boy return to his sisters, then turned back to Mary. I need to go to the office for a while. Bar the door behind me, and don't open it for anyone but me. I'll knock 3 times, pause, then twice more. Anything else? You don't open that door. Mary nodded, rising to follow him to the door. Luke, she said softly, using his given name for the first time. Whatever happens, I want you to know what you've done for us, the risk you're taking. I'll never forget it. Nothing's happening to any of us, Luke said firmly. I promise you that. At the sheriff's office, Luke found Tom Morrison cleaning his rifle, a box of ammunition on the desk beside him. The young deputy looked up as Luke entered. They're getting bolder, Tom reported. That scarred fellow, Jed, was in the saloon last night buying drinks and asking questions about you, wanting to know if you had any family visiting, any guests staying over. What did he learn? Nothing from the locals, but that new bartender, Williams, seemed mighty interested in the conversation. Luke nodded grimly. Keep an eye on Williams now, Tom. I need you to ride out to the Rockingham Ranch. Tell Big John McDonald I'm calling in that favor he owes me. Need him and 3 or 4 of his best hands in town by sundown. Armed. Tom's eyes widened slightly. Expecting trouble? Expecting to prevent it, Luke corrected. Also, stop by Judge Carter's place. Tell him I need federal warrant papers drawn up for Marcus Thornton and Calvin Rourke. Charges are extortion, human trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. That's some serious charges, Sheriff. If for some serious crimes, then get moving, Tom, and watch your back. After Tom left, Luke made several more stops around town. At each one, he spoke quietly with men he trusted, veterans mostly, men who understood duty and loyalty. By the time he returned to his house, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains. Mary opened the door at his special knock, relief flooding her face. Any trouble? Not yet, but I need you to help me prepare some things. They spent the next hour fortifying the house as best they could, moving furniture to block windows, preparing water and medical supplies, loading weapons. The children watched with wide eyes, but James kept them calm as he'd promised. As darkness fell, Luke positioned himself by the front window. The waiting was almost over. He could feel it in the air like the electricity before a storm. Sure enough, as the last light faded from the sky, he saw movement in the street. Rourke was coming, and he wasn't alone. 4 men spread out across the street, moving with the practiced ease of those who'd done this before. But Luke smiled grimly as he spotted other movement, shadows on rooftops, figures in alleys. His own preparations were bearing fruit. A knock came at the door, loud, demanding, nothing like the subtle signal he'd given Mary. Sheriff Harding, Rourke's voice carried clearly. We need to talk. Open up. Luke moved to the door but didn't open it. State your business, Rourke. You know my business. The woman and children. We know they're in there. Had a nice chat with that bartender, Williams. He saw you bringing supplies home. enough for more than just one man. Now, we can do this civilized, or we can do it the hard way. Here's the only civilized thing that's going to happen. Luke called back. You and your men are going to throw down your weapons and surrender. You're under arrest for extortion, trafficking, and conspiracy to commit murder. There was a moment of silence. Then Rourke laughed, a cold, ugly sound. You're joking. Federal warrants, Luke continued calmly. Judge Carter signed them an hour ago. You can surrender to me, or you can wait for the U.S. Marshals. Your choice. Or, Rourke said, we can just take what we came for and leave your corpse for the marshals to find. You're welcome to try, Luke said, but you might want to look around first. There was a pause. Luke could imagine Rourke's eyes scanning the darkness, finally spotting what Luke had seen. The rifle barrels glinting from rooftops, the men positioned in strategic locations. Seems you've been busy, Sheriff, Rourke said, his voice tighter now. I've got good friends in this town, men who don't take kindly to thugs threatening women and children. You're outnumbered. Rourke, be smart. Surrender. You don't know who you're crossing. Harding. Marcus Thornton has resources you can't imagine. Kill us, and he'll just send more. You can't protect them forever. Maybe not, Luke admitted, but I can protect them tonight, and tomorrow, and every day after that until Thornton joins you in federal custody. See, that's the difference between men like you and men like me. You're used to folks running scared, but sometimes you run into someone who won't run. Tonight, that's me. Another silence. Luke could feel Mary behind him, holding her breath. The children were huddled in the back room, James keeping them quiet as promised. This isn't over, Rourke finally said. No, Luke agreed, and it's not. But your part in it is. You've got 1 minute to throw down your weapons and step into the street with your hands up. After that, well, my friends have itchy trigger fingers. The silence stretched longer this time. Then, finally, Luke heard the clatter of guns hitting the ground. Through the window, he saw Rourke and his men step into the middle of the street, hands raised. Tom, Luke called, take them into custody. As his deputy and several armed townsmen surrounded Rourke's group, Luke finally opened his door. Mary stood behind him, tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of relief, not fear. It's over, she whispered. This part is, Luke corrected gently. We still need to deal with Thornton, and you'll need to testify. But Rourke was right about one thing. I'll protect you and the children for as long as it takes. That's a promise. Mary looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd found her in that stable, she smiled, really smiled. I believe you, she said simply. And in that moment, as the bad men were led away and the good men of Cedar Ridge stood guard, Luke realized that his house wasn't the only thing that had found a new purpose. Sometimes, he thought, salvation came in the most unexpected ways, even in the form of a frightened woman and 3 children, shivering in a stable on the coldest night of the year. The days following Rourke's arrest brought an uneasy peace to Luke's household. Word had spread through town about the confrontation, and folks looked at their sheriff with newfound respect. But Luke knew better than to relax. Thornton was still out there, and men like him didn't give up easily. On the 4th morning, Luke woke to find fresh horse tracks circling his property. Someone had been scouting during the night, careful to stay just beyond the light from his windows. He studied the tracks in the early morning frost, noting the distinctive mark of a chipped horseshoe. Whoever it was had military training. The pattern showed disciplined reconnaissance, not random wandering. Inside, Mary was already awake, kneading bread dough with focused intensity. She'd thrown herself into household tasks since Rourke's capture, as if keeping busy could hold her fears at bay. The children were still asleep, exhausted from the tension of recent days. "More visitors last night," Luke said quietly, pouring himself coffee. Mary's hands stilled on the dough. "How many?" "Just one scouting. They're being careful now." He sat at the table, watching her work. "Mary, we need to talk about what comes next." She resumed kneading, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. "The federal marshals? Should be here within the week. Tom rode to Fort Laramie to wire them directly to... But that's not what I mean." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "When this is over, when Thornton's brought to justice, what then?" Mary's hands stilled again. I haven't thought that far ahead. For months, all I've thought about was keeping the children safe one more day." "Ooh, well, maybe it's time to start thinking beyond that." She turned to face him, flour dusting her hands. "What are you saying, Luke?" Before he could answer, young James burst into the kitchen. "Sheriff Luke, there's men coming, lots of them." Luke was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. A group of riders was approaching from the east, 6 men, well armed, moving with purpose. But as they drew closer, Luke relaxed slightly. The lead rider wore a badge that caught the morning sun. "Federal Marshal," he told Mary, who had gone pale. "This is good. This is what we've been waiting for." The lead marshal was a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a gray mustache. He introduced himself as Marshal Frank Barrett and wasted no time getting to business. "Sheriff Harding, we received your wire about Marcus Thornton. Serious allegations? You have witnesses?" "I do," Luke confirmed. "And 4 of his men in custody, including Calvin Rourke." Barrett's eyebrows rose. "Rourke? We've been wanting to talk to him about some matters in Colorado. This witness of yours must be compelling to make you take such risks." "She is," Luke said simply. "She's also terrified. Thornton's had her on the run for months. I'll need to speak with her. Take her statement. If it's solid, we can move on Thornton within days." Luke glanced back at the house where Mary waited. "Marshal, these people have been through hell. The woman especially. I'd ask that you be gentle in your questioning." Barrett's stern expression softened slightly. "I've got daughters of my own. Sheriff, I know how to handle frightened witnesses." The interview took place in Luke's parlor, with Mary sitting rigid in a chair while Marshal Barrett asked his questions. Luke stayed nearby, a reassuring presence. The children were sent to play in the bedroom, though James kept peeking around the corner. Mary's voice started weak but grew stronger as she told her story. She provided dates, names, places, a detailed account of Thornton's operation that had the marshal taking copious notes. When she described Daniel's death and Thornton's subsequent demands, Barrett's face darkened. "Mrs. Whitfield," the marshal said when she finished. "What you've described is enough to put Thornton away for a very long time. But I need to ask, are you willing to testify in court? It could be dangerous." Mary glanced at Luke, then straightened her shoulders. "If it means my children will be safe, if it means other women won't suffer what I've suffered, then yes, I'll testify." Barrett nodded approvingly. "You're a brave woman, ma'am. We'll post men to ensure your safety until the trial. Sheriff Harding, I'll need your full cooperation." "You have it," Luke assured him, after Barrett left to coordinate with his men. Luke found Mary in the kitchen, staring out the window at the marshals setting up positions around the property. "You did well," he said softly. "I'm still scared," she admitted. "What if Thornton has men we don't know about? What if they come after the children? Then they'll have to go through me, the marshals, and half this town." Luke said firmly, You're not alone in this anymore, Mary. You haven't been since that night in the stable. She turned to face him, and something in her expression made his heart skip. Luke, I need to say something. These past days, what you've done for us. I came here with nothing, trusting no one, and you gave us everything. Safety, shelter, hope. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, Luke said, stepping closer. Seeing you and the children safe, seeing you smile again, that's thanks enough. Is it? Mary asked softly. Is that really all you want? The question hung in the air between them. Luke had been asking himself the same thing for days now. Somewhere between that first night and this moment, his feelings had shifted from duty to something deeper. No, he admitted, and it's not all I want. But you've been through so much, Mary. I won't add to your burdens by... She silenced him by placing a flour-dusted hand on his arm. The only burden would be leaving here when this is over. The children. They've come to love you. James talks constantly about learning to be a lawman like you. Emma calls you Papa Luke when she thinks I'm not listening. And what about you? Luke asked, his voice rough. What do you call me when you think I'm not listening? A blush colored her cheeks. The answer to prayers I'd stopped believing in, she whispered. Luke pulled her into his arms then, holding her as she trembled against him. They stood that way for a long moment, no words needed, until a delighted giggle from the doorway made them spring apart. Sarah and Emma stood there, eyes bright with mischief. Mama's hugging Sheriff Luke, Emma announced gleefully. Are you gonna marry him, Mama? Sarah asked with the directness of childhood. Mary's blush deepened, but Luke knelt down to the girl's level. How would you young ladies feel about that? About staying here in Cedar Ridge? Forever? Sarah asked hopefully. Forever, Luke confirmed, glancing up at Mary. Yes, both girls shouted, launching themselves at him. James appeared then, trying to look mature but unable to hide his grin. Does this mean you'll teach me to shoot? The boy asked hopefully. When you're older, Luke promised, ruffling his hair. For now, how about we start with riding and tracking? As the children chattered excitedly about their new life, Luke caught Mary's eye. She was crying again, but smiling through the tears. He stood, still holding Emma, and reached for Mary's hand. Is that a yes? He asked softly. To staying, to marriage, to building a life together? Mary squeezed his hand. Yes to all of it. That evening, as the federal marshals kept watch and the children played by the fire, Luke and Mary sat together on the porch despite the cold. The stars were brilliant in the clear winter sky, and the town was peaceful. A Thornton won't give up easily, Mary said, leaning into Luke's warmth. No, he won't, Luke agreed. But that's tomorrow's worry. Tonight, we're safe. Tonight, we're together. And I promise you, Mary, whatever comes, we'll face it as a family. She tilted her face up to his, and he kissed her gently, sealing the promise. Inside, the children laughed at something, the sound bright and carefree. It was the sound of healing, of hope renewed. In the distance, a coyote howled, and the marshals shifted at their posts. Danger still lurked beyond the circle of light from Luke's home. But within that circle, love had taken root in the most unlikely soil, born from courage, nurtured by kindness, and strong enough to weather whatever storms lay ahead. As they went inside to join the children, Luke marveled at how much had changed since that snowy night. He'd thought he was just doing his duty, offering shelter to those in need. Instead, he'd found the family he hadn't known he was looking for. And somewhere out there, Marcus Thornton was about to learn what happened when you threatened Luke Harding's family. The tension had been building for 3 days like a storm gathering on the horizon. Despite the federal marshal's presence, Luke couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. He'd learned to trust his instincts over the years, and right now they were screaming danger. It was just past sunset when it finally happened. Luke was in the barn, tending to the horses when he heard the first shot. It came from the east, where Marshal Davis was posted. Then came answering fire from multiple directions, and Luke knew Thornton had come himself. He grabbed his rifle and sprinted toward the house, staying low. Through the windows, he could see Mary herding the children into the back room, just as they'd practiced. Good. She was keeping her head. "Hi, Sheriff," Marshal Barrett's voice cut through the gunfire. "They're trying to flank us from the north." Luke spotted movement in that direction, figures darting between buildings, using the gathering darkness as cover. He counted at least 8 men, maybe more. Thornton had brought a small army. "How many?" Luke called back, firing at a shadow that got too bold. "A dozen, maybe 15, Barrett replied grimly. "They hit Davis first, took him down before he could warn us. These aren't common thugs. Harding, they know what they're doing." Luke's mind raced. The house was defensible, but not against those numbers. Not for long. They needed to change the game. "Tom," he shouted to his deputy, who was crouched behind a water trough. "Ring the church bell. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short." It was Cedar Ridge's emergency signal. Within minutes, armed townsmen would converge on the area. But minutes might be too long. A voice rang out from the darkness, smooth, cultured, with an undertone of steel. "Sheriff Harding, this needn't be a massacre. Send out the woman and children, and we'll withdraw. You have my word." Luke recognized the voice from Mary's description. Marcus Thornton himself. "Your word isn't worth the breath you waste speaking it, Thornton," Luke called back. "You're surrounded by federal officers. Surrender now, and maybe you'll live to see trial." Thornton laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Federal officers, I count 4, maybe 5. I have 15 men. Sheriff, men who've killed before and will again. Is one woman worth all these lives?" "Every innocent person is worth protecting," Luke replied. "That's the difference between lawmen and outlaws." "Noble words," Thornton said. "Let's see if your townspeople feel the same when their sheriff gets them killed." The attack came from 3 sides at once. Gunfire erupted like deadly fireworks. Muzzle flashes lighting the darkness. Luke fired steadily, picking his targets, making every shot count, beside him. Barrett and his remaining marshals held their ground, but they were badly outnumbered. Then Luke heard what he'd been dreading, splintering wood from the back of the house. They were trying to break in. "Mary!" he shouted, but gunfire drowned out his voice. He started toward the house, but 2 men rose from behind an overturned wagon, firing rapidly. Luke dove behind a pile of firewood as bullets whined overhead. He was pinned down, unable to reach the house. That's when he heard it, the church bell ringing out its warning. Tom had made it. Help would come. But would it be in time? From inside the house came the sound of struggle, then a child's scream. Emma. Raw fury flooded through Luke. He rose from cover, heedless of the danger, rifle blazing. One attacker fell, then another. He was almost to the porch when a figure stepped out, Thornton himself holding a pistol to Mary's head. The children clustered behind her, James trying to shield his sisters. "Drop the rifle, Sheriff," Thornton commanded. He was younger than Luke had expected, perhaps 35, with the kind of handsomeness that masked cruelty. "Or I'll paint your porch with her brains." Luke stopped, his rifle trained on Thornton. Around them. The gunfire was dying down as both sides realized the standoff at the center. "Let them go, Thornton," Luke said, his voice deadly calm. "It's over. Hear that bell? The whole town's coming. You'll never make it out." "Then I'll take what I came for," Thornton snarled. "This woman cost me money, sheriff, reputation. No one defies me and lives." "Please," Mary whispered, not for herself but looking at her children. "Please don't hurt them." "Mama," Emma cried, trying to reach for her mother, but James held her back. "Such touching family drama," Thornton mocked. "Tell me, Sheriff, are you really willing to die for another man's widow? For children that aren't yours?" "They're mine now," Luke said simply, "and yes." Something flickered in Thornton's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. The barrel of his pistol wavered slightly. That's when young James moved. With courage beyond his years, the boy lunged forward and bit Thornton's gun hand hard. Thornton cursed, his grip loosening, and Mary twisted away. Luke didn't hesitate. His rifle cracked once, and Thornton spun backward, clutching his shoulder. The outlaw's pistol clattered across the porch. James, get them inside," Luke ordered, advancing on Thornton. The boy grabbed his sisters and pulled them into the house, Mary stumbling after them. Thornton lay on the porch, blood seeping through his fingers. His handsome face was twisted with pain and rage. "You'll regret this. Harding, I have friends. Influence. You think this ends with me? I think you're done hurting innocent people." Luke replied. Around them, he could hear the sounds of surrender as Thornton's men, realizing their leader was down and reinforcements were arriving, threw down their weapons. The church bell continued to ring, and now Luke could hear horses, lots of them. The people of Cedar Ridge were coming, just as he'd known they would. This was their town, and they protected their own. Marshal Barrett appeared, blood trickling from a gash on his forehead but otherwise intact. "You all right, Sheriff?" "Fine," Luke said, not taking his eyes off Thornton. "You?" "I'll live. Lost Davis, though. Maybe Hendricks, too." Barrett looked down at Thornton with disgust. "Marcus Thornton, you're under arrest for murder, attempted murder, extortion, and about a dozen other charges I'll think of by morning." As Barrett's men secured Thornton and rounded up his surviving gang members, Luke finally lowered his rifle. The porch door opened, and Mary emerged, Emma in her arms. Sarah and James pressed close to her sides. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice shaking. Luke pulled them all into his arms, feeling them tremble against him. "It's over," he assured them. "He can't hurt you anymore." "You saved us," James said, looking up at him with hero worship in his eyes. "You and Mama both. She hit one of them with a frying pan when they broke in." Luke looked at Mary in surprise, and she managed a shaky smile. "You said I'd fight for my children, and I meant it." The next hour was chaos. Townspeople arrived in force, many still in their night clothes but carrying rifles. Doc Henderson tended the wounded while Reverend Mills comforted those shaken by the violence. The captured outlaws were locked in the jail, overflow prisoners secured in the courthouse basement. Through it all, Luke kept Mary and the children close. They'd retreated to the kitchen, away from the blood on the porch and the curious stares of the townspeople. Mary made coffee with trembling hands while the children huddled together, processing what they'd witnessed. "Will he come back?" Sarah asked in a small voice. "No, sweetheart," Luke assured her. "He's going to prison for a very long time, and even if he ever got out, I'd never let him near you again." "You promise?" Emma asked, reaching for him. "I promise," Luke said, lifting her into his lap. "You're safe now, all of you." Later, after the children had finally fallen asleep and the marshals had taken their prisoners away, Luke and Mary sat alone in the quiet kitchen. The coffee had long gone cold, but neither moved to make fresh. "When Thornton had that gun to my head," Mary said quietly, "all I could think about was that I'd never told you I loved you. Luke reached across the table and took her hand. Mary, no, let me finish, she interrupted. I've been so focused on running, on being afraid, that I didn't let myself feel what was happening between us. But tonight, when I thought I might die, I realized I don't want to waste another day. I love you, Luke Harding. Somehow, in the middle of all this madness, I fell in love with you. Luke stood and moved around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. I love you too, he said roughly. Have since about the second day, I think, watching you with the children, seeing your strength even when you were terrified. Mary, you're the strongest woman I've ever known. She laughed, a watery sound. I don't feel strong. I feel like I've been shattered and put back together wrong. No, Luke said firmly, tilting her chin up to meet his eyes. Put back together stronger, like a broken bone that heals. You survived things that would have destroyed most people, and you did it for your children. That's not weakness, Mary. That's the purest kind of strength there is. She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and relief and love into it. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. So what happens now? Mary asked. Now? Luke smiled. Now we plan a wedding. We build a life. We raise those 3 amazing children. We make sure nothing like this ever touches our family again. Our family, Mary repeated, wonder in her voice. I like the sound of that. So do I, Luke said, holding her close. So do I. Outside, dawn was beginning to break, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The night of violence was over, and with it, the long nightmare that had driven Mary and her children into that freezing stable. They'd found more than shelter in Cedar Ridge. They'd found home, love, and a future free from fear, and in a frontier town where danger was never far away. They'd also found something even more precious, a community that would stand together against any threat, and a love strong enough to weather any storm. 2 weeks had passed since the night of violence, and Luke's house had transformed into something that truly felt like home. The bullet holes in the walls had been patched and painted over, the blood-stained porch boards replaced. More importantly, laughter had returned to fill the rooms, the sound of children playing, of Mary humming while she cooked, of family dinners filled with chatter about the day's events. Luke came home one evening to find Mary teaching Sarah how to embroider while Emma played with a corn-husk doll on the rug. James was at the table, carefully practicing his letters on a slate. The boy looked up as Luke entered, his face brightening. Sheriff Luke, look, I wrote your name. He held up the slate proudly. Luke examined the careful letters. That's fine work, son. Your penmanship's getting better every day. Your mama says if I keep practicing, I can help you with paperwork at the jail someday, James said eagerly. I'd like that, Luke said, ruffling the boy's hair. He moved to where Mary sat, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. How was your day? She looked up at him with those warm brown eyes that still made his heart skip. Peaceful. Blessedly. Wonderfully peaceful. Mrs. Patterson stopped by with apple preserves, and Reverend Mill's wife brought fabric for new dresses for the girls. The whole town's adopted you 4, Luke said with a smile. Can't say I blame them. That night, after the children were asleep, Luke and Mary sat on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in a heavy blanket. It had become their evening ritual, a quiet time to talk and plan and simply be together. The trial's set for next month, Luke told her. Marshal Barrett says with your testimony and all the evidence, Thornton will get 20 years at least. Maybe life. Mary shivered, and not from the cold. Will I have to see him, face him? You'll have to testify, yes, but I'll be right there with you. And this time, he'll be the one in chains, not you running in fear. She leaned into his warmth. I still have nightmares sometimes. That he's found us. That he's taking the children. Those will fade with time, Luke assured her. And whenever you wake afraid, I'll be right there beside you. That's a promise. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. Then Mary spoke again, her voice soft. Luke, can I ask you something? Anything. Why didn't you ever marry before? A man like you, kind, strong, honorable, you must have had opportunities. Luke was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. I suppose I was waiting, he said finally. Didn't know what for, exactly. Just knew that none of the women I'd courted felt right. Like I was trying to force something that wasn't meant to be. He pulled her closer. Now I know I was waiting for you. For all of you. Even with all our troubles, our past. Especially with all that, Luke said firmly. You've shown me what real courage looks like, Mary. What real love looks like. The kind that sacrifices everything for family. I'd be a fool not to want that in my life. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Luke was at the jail when Tom announced, Lady here to see you. Sheriff. Says she's Mrs. Whitfield's sister. Luke's eyebrows rose. Mary had never mentioned a sister. He found a well-dressed woman in her 30s waiting in his office. Her resemblance to Mary unmistakable despite the expensive clothes and carefully styled hair. Hey, Sheriff Harding, I'm Catherine Morrison, Mary's sister. She extended a gloved hand. Mrs. Morrison, Luke said carefully, shaking her hand. Mary hasn't mentioned you. A flash of pain crossed the woman's face. No, I don't suppose she would have. We haven't spoken in over 2 years. Not since she married Daniel against our parents' wishes. I see. Catherine fidgeted with her reticule. I heard about what happened, about Daniel's death and everything after. I came as soon as I could. Why now? Luke asked bluntly. Because I was wrong, Catherine said simply. I let pride and our parents' prejudice keep me from my sister when she needed me most. I've come to make amends, if she'll let me. And she hesitated, then continued, and to offer help. My husband is quite wealthy. We could ensure Mary and the children want for nothing. Luke studied her, reading sincerity in her expression, but also something else, an assumption that money could fix everything. I think you should talk to Mary about this yourself. But Mrs. Morrison, you should know. Your sister and her children aren't lacking anything. They have a home here, a family, a future. Catherine's eyes widened slightly. You and Mary we're to be married next month, Luke confirmed. And I'll be adopting the children. I see. Catherine seemed to reassess him. You're not what I expected from a frontier sheriff. And Mary's not the same woman you knew 2 years ago, Luke said. She's been through trials that would break most people. But she's come out stronger. Whatever you're planning to say to her, keep that in mind. He escorted Catherine to his house, sending word for Tom to handle the jail. Mary was in the garden with the children, taking advantage of a mild winter day to tend to some hardy vegetables. She looked up as they approached, and the color drained from her face. Catherine? Hello, Mary, her sister said softly. The children looked between the two women curiously. Mary stood slowly, brushing dirt from her apron. Children, go inside and wash up for lunch. I'll be along shortly. Once they were alone, the sisters faced each other across years of silence and hurt. Catherine spoke first. I'm sorry, she said, tears gathering in her eyes. I'm so very sorry, Mary. For not being there when Daniel died, for not helping when you needed me, for choosing our parents' approval over my own sister. Mary's own eyes filled. "Why now, Catherine? Why come now?" "Because I finally grew a spine," Catherine said with a watery laugh. "Because I realized that losing my sister's love was worse than losing our parents' approval. Because I have children of my own now, and the thought of them facing what yours faced." She broke off. Overcome, Mary closed the distance between them, pulling her sister into a fierce embrace. They clung to each other, crying for lost time and old wounds and the healing that was finally beginning. Luke watched from the porch, giving them privacy but staying close in case Mary needed him. This was her battle to fight, her reconciliation to make or refuse. After a time, the sisters moved to the porch, still holding hands. Catherine looked at Luke with new understanding. "Thank you," she said simply, "for protecting her when I didn't." "Family protects family," Luke replied. "And Mary's family now includes the whole of Cedar Ridge." They spent the afternoon talking, catching up on 2 years of separation. Catherine met her nieces and nephew properly, winning Emma over with a pretty hair ribbon and Sarah with stories of her own children. James remained wary, protective of his mother, until Catherine surprised him by asking about his studies and praising his reading. As evening approached, Catherine prepared to leave for the hotel. "I'll stay for the wedding," she announced, "if you'll have me." "Mary." "Of course," Mary said, squeezing her hand. "We have so much time to make up for." After Catherine left, Mary found Luke in his study working on reports. She slipped onto his lap, surprising him. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For giving me the courage to face her. A month ago, I would have hidden, maybe even run again. But you've shown me that facing our fears is the only way to defeat them." "You've always had that courage," Luke said, wrapping his arms around her. "I just helped you remember it." That night at dinner, the table was lively with talk of Aunt Catherine and wedding plans. Sarah wanted to know if she could wear her new dress, while Emma was more interested in whether there would be cake. James, practical as always, asked if Aunt Catherine's presence meant they were rich now. "We were already rich," Mary told him, looking around the table at her family, "just not in money." "But money's nice too, right?" James persisted, making everyone laugh. "It can be," Luke agreed, "but it can't buy the important things. It can't buy courage or love or family." "Or chocolate cake?" Emma asked hopefully. "Well, it can buy that," Luke conceded with a grin. "And yes, little one, there will be chocolate cake at the wedding. Later." As Luke made his final rounds before bed, he found Mary in the children's room watching them sleep. She did this every night, as if reassuring herself they were safe. "They're not going anywhere," he said softly, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I know," she whispered. "It's just, for so long I went to sleep afraid I'd wake to find them gone, or that we'd have to run in the night. Old habits." "New habits take time," Luke said, "but we have that now. All the time in the world." She turned in his arms, looking up at him in the dim light. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real. That we're safe. That we have a home. That you love us." "I believe it," Luke said firmly, "because I'm going to spend every day for the rest of our lives proving it's true." They stood there in the doorway, watching over their sleeping children, planning their future. In a few weeks, they'd stand before the town and make official what was already true in their hearts. They were a family. The journey that had begun with a desperate woman and 3 children shivering in a stable would culminate in joy and celebration. But for now, this quiet moment was enough. The peaceful breathing of children, the warmth of love acknowledged, and the promise of all the tomorrows to come. Outside, Cedar Ridge slept peacefully under a blanket of stars, and inside Luke's house, A family that had found each other against all odds settled in for another night of safety and love. The wounds of the past would take time to fully heal, but they would heal, and in their place would grow something stronger. A love forged in adversity, tested by fire, and proven true. It was, Luke thought as he led Mary to their room, more than he'd ever dared hope for. It was everything. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with fresh snow sparkling like diamonds across Cedar Ridge. Luke stood at his window, watching the sun paint the mountains gold, hardly believing this day had finally come. In just a few hours, Mary would be his wife, and James, Sarah, and Emma would officially become his children. Nervous? Tom Morrison asked from the doorway, already dressed in his best suit. Excited, Luke corrected, turning from the window. Feels like I've been waiting my whole life for this day. Across town, in Catherine's hotel room, Mary sat before a mirror while her sister pinned up her hair. She wore a simple but elegant blue dress that Catherine had brought from Denver, and her mother's pearl necklace, one of the few treasures she'd managed to keep through all their trials. "You look beautiful," Catherine said softly, meeting Mary's eyes in the mirror. "Daniel would be happy for you, you know. He'd want you to have this love, security, a good father for his children." Mary's eyes misted. "I know. Sometimes I feel guilty for being so happy when he's gone. But then I remember how Luke saved us, how he's loved us, and I know this is right." "Mama, you look like a princess." Emma burst through the door, followed by Sarah in their matching pink dresses. "So do you, my darlings," Mary said, pulling them close. "My beautiful girls." James appeared next, tugging at his new collar. "Do I have to wear this all day?" "Just through the ceremony," Mary promised, smoothing his hair. "You look so handsome, so grown up." "I'm practicing walking straight," James said seriously. "Since I'm giving you away, Sheriff Luke showed me how." Mary's heart swelled. Luke had suggested that James have that honor, understanding how important it was for the boy to feel part of creating this new family. The church was packed when they arrived. It seemed the entire town had turned out to witness their sheriff's wedding. Mary saw familiar faces everywhere, Mrs. Patterson dabbing at her eyes, the widow Martinez beaming, Big John McDonald and his ranch hands cleaned up and grinning. These people who had become their community, their extended family. But Mary had eyes only for Luke, standing tall and strong at the altar in his black suit. When their eyes met, his face lit up with such joy that her last nervousness melted away. This was right. This was home. Reverend Mills beamed at the congregation. "Dearly beloved, we gather today to witness something special, not just a wedding, but the formal creation of a family. Love has brought these 5 souls together, and love will sustain them through whatever trials lie ahead." James walked Mary down the aisle with all the solemnity of his 7 years, placing her hand in Luke's with a gravity that made several women reach for their handkerchiefs. Sarah and Emma stood as flower girls, occasionally waving at friends in the pews. "Mary," Luke said when it came time for the vows, his voice strong and clear. "You came into my life during a storm, and you brought with you the sunshine I didn't know I was missing. I promise to love you, protect you, and cherish you all the days of my life. I promise to be a faithful husband to you and a devoted father to James, Sarah, and Emma. Your joys will be my joys, your sorrows my sorrows. This is my solemn vow." Mary's voice trembled with emotion as she spoke her own vows. "Luke, you gave us shelter when we had none, hope when we had lost it, and love when we thought we'd never feel safe again. You showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the determination to do what's right despite it. I promise to love you, stand beside you, and build a life with you filled with laughter and warmth. I promise to be your faithful wife and partner in all things. This is my solemn vow." When Reverend Mills pronounced them husband and wife, the church erupted in cheers. Luke kissed Mary tenderly, then scooped Emma up in one arm and put the other around James and Sarah, pulling them all into the embrace. They were a family now, official and complete. The reception was held at the town hall, transformed with ribbons and winter flowers. Catherine had insisted on paying for the feast, and the tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, pies, and yes, the chocolate cake Emma had been dreaming of. Luke and Mary moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and good wishes. Marshal Barrett, who had stayed for the wedding, shook Luke's hand firmly. "You've got yourself a brave woman there, Harding," he said. "And she's got herself a good man. Thornton's trial is next month. With her testimony, he'll never threaten another family again." "That's all we want," Luke replied. "We want to live in peace and watch our children grow." As the afternoon wore on, Luke found himself watching Mary as she laughed with the town women. Emma on her hip, Sarah holding her hand. She looked radiant, all traces of the frightened, desperate woman from the stable gone. In her place stood someone strong and confident, surrounded by love and community. "She cleans up nice, doesn't she?" Big John McDonald said, joining Luke. "Hard to believe she's the same frozen little thing you carried in that night." "She was always this strong," Luke said. "Just took some time for her to remember it." As evening approached and the celebration began to wind down, Luke gathered his family. "Ready to go home?" "Can we take some cake?" Emma asked sleepily. "Already wrapped and waiting," Mary assured her. They walked home through the quiet streets, James and Luke carrying the sleeping girls. The house welcomed them with warmth from the banked fire Tom had tended. As they tucked the children into bed, each child demanded a goodnight kiss from both parents. "Are you really our papa now?" Sarah asked Luke sleepily. "Really and forever," Luke promised, kissing her forehead. "Good," she murmured, already drifting off. "We needed a papa." Later. Luke and Mary stood on their porch, her wedding dress replaced by a warm robe, his arm around her shoulders. The moon had risen full and bright, turning the snow-covered landscape into a fairyland of silver and shadow. "No regrets?" Luke asked softly. "How could I regret the best thing that ever happened to us?" Mary replied. "You saved us, Luke. In every way a person can be saved." "You saved me too," Luke said. "I was just existing before you came, going through the motions, doing my duty. You and the children brought me back to life." They stood in comfortable silence, looking out over their town, their home. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. There was still the trial to face, the continuing work of healing, the daily tasks of raising 3 energetic children. But tonight was for celebrating how far they'd come. "Luke," Mary said after a while. That first night, when you found us in the stable, did you know then? Did you have any idea we'd end up here?" Luke considered the question. "I knew I couldn't leave you in that cold. I knew those children deserved better. But this," he gestured to encompass their home, their life, their love. "No, I didn't imagine this. This is better than anything I could have imagined. It's like a miracle," Mary said softly. "From that frozen stable to this warm home, from running in fear to standing strong with love. If someone had told me that night that I'd find safety and love and a new father for my children, I'd have thought they were mad." "Maybe that's what miracles are," Luke suggested. "Not lightning from the sky, but people choosing to help each other, choosing love over fear, community over isolation." "Then Cedar Ridge is full of miracles," Mary said. thinking of all the people who had helped them, supported them, celebrated with them today. That it is, Luke agreed, and we're part of that now, part of the fabric of this place. A coyote howled in the distance, but it no longer sounded threatening. It was just part of the night, part of the wildness that surrounded their civilized little town. Inside their house, their children slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams happy children dream. Tomorrow they'd wake to a new day in their new official family, with all the adventures and challenges that would bring. Ready to go in, Mrs. Harding? Luke asked, smiling at the way her face lit up at her new name. Lead the way, Sheriff Harding, she replied, taking his hand as they entered their home together. Luke paused to look back at the barn where this journey had begun, where desperation had met compassion on the coldest night of the year, and both had been transformed into something beautiful and lasting. In the Wild West, where danger lurked and life was uncertain, they had built something precious, a family forged by choice rather than just blood, a love tested by fire and proven true, and a home that would shelter not just their bodies but their hearts for all the years to come. The door closed softly behind them, shutting out the cold and sealing in the warmth. In Cedar Ridge, Sheriff Luke Harding and his family slept peacefully, their future stretching before them like an unwritten book, waiting to be filled with the simple joys and everyday miracles of a life lived with love.